As we're all pretty much well aware at this point, there has been huge amounts of news about the rail strikes been taking place across the country. I did a segment on it a couple of weeks ago talking about the fact that strikes were going to be happening across the rail network, organised by the union RMT, headed by Mick Lynch. Now, Mick Lynch is a figure who's been across the media for the past 10 days at this point, consistently bodying every single member of the mainstream media. Kay Burley, Piers Morgan, Richard Madeley, they've all had their asses handed to them by Mick Lynch, who's the General Secretary of RMT. The guy is an absolute certified Giga Chad. Let's be fucking real. Because he's cutting through all the bullshit. He's cutting through all the nonsense and just telling it like it is. It's amazing what happens when someone who is not intent on having some kind of future media career is happy to actually tell the truth without any spin, without any kind of subtext or anything like that. It's all entirely straight up. This is what I believe. This is what I want. I want to negotiate. This is what it's all about, right? And that's been incredibly refreshing for plenty of people who's earned himself quite a cult following. So what we're going to do, there's a new question time episode up which has Mick Lynch. Now he's against like two business owners or business advisors, a Tory MP, and then a really right-wing Labour MP, as well as Fiona Bruce, who's pretty fucking conservative herself. So it's basically 5-on-1 for Mick Lynch on this episode of Question Time. So it should be a pretty interesting episode. We'll see what gets on. I've seen a couple of clips of this on Twitter already, so there's plenty of funny bits for us to get to. Either way, without further ado, let's get on with it and then watch this episode of Question Time.
Welcome to Question Time. Tonight we're in Stratford-upon-Avon. On tonight's panel, Rachel Maclean, the government's safeguarding minister at the Home Office and former transport minister. Before entering politics, she worked in banking and co-founded a publishing company. Nick Thomas Symonds, Labour's shadow international trade secretary, MP for the Welsh former mining area where he was born and raised, and author of biographies on Clem Attlee and Nye Bevan. Anne Bowden, tech entrepreneur, chief operating officer of Allied Irish Bank following the 2008 financial crash, now boss and founder of the online-only bank, Starling Bank. Businessman, chief executive of commercial property investment company First Property Group, and former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib.
Property investor. It feels dirty.
And a railwayman for nearly 30 years. He left school at 16 to work as an electrician, then in construction, and is now General Secretary of the UK's biggest transport union, the RMT, Mick Lynch. Good evening. Welcome to my panel. Welcome to our audience here in Stratford-upon-Avon, and welcome to you at home. Thank you very much for watching, and do join in the conversation on social media at BBC Question Time in the usual way. OK, let's get started. And we're going to start unusually with two questions tonight, one straight after the other. Let's have our first one from Samantha Marklow.
Do the RMT think it's fair that whilst the whole country is suffering a cost of living crisis, that they can disrupt people's working lives and subsequently their income? And Sonia Sangera.
Why do public sector workers continue to be disrespected with measly pay rises and villainised by the government for demanding what is fair?
The obvious first person to go to is you, Nick.
Well, I'm glad you asked me that. Fairness is a difficult one. I understand the disruption and the inconvenience and the anger that our dispute and our industrial action will have on the people of Britain and on our communities, and I understand how they feel that it's not fair. I do understand that. And we don't want to be on strike. We don't want to take industrial action. Our members are ordinary men and women from up and down this country, in every community virtually, including in this one in Stratford-upon-Avon. And they're railway workers who are tired of the way they're being treated. Now, we were lauded as heroes by Grant Shapps, our members. They worked all the way through the pandemic. They were not furloughed, and they kept our railway and transport systems going, including the buses and the maritime ferries that serve our communities, and indeed in the offshore oil and gas industry. But what they're being told now, as a result of that, is that you're out of fashion, you're out of date. Somehow, the terms and conditions that we've negotiated over many years, which we think are a fair deal, and we think that every British worker should benefit from, terms and conditions such as the ones that we have, such as limits on the amount of unsocial hours that we do, limits on the amount of weekends that we have to do, and agreed, negotiated pay, rate for the job, so that you're not just subject to the whims of the market and the way that the economy is going at that particular time, so that you can depend on a secure income and a secure job. And if you fall on hard times, if you get seriously ill, you'll get sick pay and you get an agreed amount of holidays. We think that's what every worker in Britain, in every business, should have. But what we're faced with now is a clampdown, and it's a deliberate clampdown by the government. And they're using COVID the temporary phenomenon of COVID, albeit an extended one, as an excuse to rip out and strip out terms and conditions.
OK, well,
and
we
we've
have a
seen it
member
in
of the
Asia.
government here. Mick, should we put some of these points to Rachel?
Oh, okay. I guess I guess Fiona Bruce is too busy. I guess he'd spend too much time talking about the issues. Although to be fair, I think his point in the explicit point to make here to try and get it across to people is say, look, this is something that we believe should have access to everybody, and the reason why the people who are represented by the RMC have it is because of the collective bargaining that they've engaged in. There is no other way. You can't just be asked nicely. You can't just expect that you're going to the benevolent force of the bourgeois is just going to bestow you with the benefits that have been fought for by the unions, by collective bargaining. You have to use your leverage, your bargaining power, which is your ability to withdraw your labour, to be able to get those things. And so, just the fact it's the fact that they are represented by the RMT is why they have those explicit benefits in their particular line of work. And if everyone else collectively bargained in the same way that the RMT does, then more people in the country would have access to those. So instead of a weird race to the bottom, where it's just like, oh, well, you've got it too good compared to me, so I'm going to bring you down. No, let's bring everybody up, right? A rising tide lifts all boats, admittedly at the expense of the poor old shareholders. Won't somebody please think of them for 5 seconds? Although I obviously won't. And then have a bit of a transfer of wealth in this country from the rich, who are the people who don't do anything. All they do is own stuff, and then they get paid out for owning shit. And get that actually filtered down to the people who do create the wealth of our civilization. As Mick has said in previous interviews, well, the people who actually engage in the labour that creates that wealth in the first place. And the way that you do that, in a system in which you have the class conflict that is a part and parcel of a capitalist system which does divide people into bourgeois and proletariat, you have to use you're the biggest leverage that you have, and that is the fact that you can withdraw your labour. And he's absolutely correct that if everyone did that, everyone would have access to it. That's a very key point.
So I think first thing to say is that the government doesn't want strikes. And I think we don't need to have strikes either. What we do need to do is ask Mick and his team to come back and negotiate with Network Rail so that we...
No, if the government needs to come back and negotiate, the franchisees have already said they're happy to go ahead and be able to come up to the negotiating table, but they're being deliberately hamstrung by the government to be able to create the toxic environment that's meant we've led to strike action, which funnily enough has incredibly backfired on the government, as the public is overwhelmingly in favour, 54% to 33%. They're overwhelmingly in favour of strike action taking place. All that's done by them forcing through strike action to try and demonise the labour movement, as all that's meant is that more people have been thinking about the power of union action and the power of being able to collectively bargain. So much so that the Join a Union section of the Trade Unions Congress website has had 184% of usual traffic.
We can prevent strikes, and there is obviously time to do that. There's a pathway through that. And Mick's right to talk about terms and conditions, but the terms and conditions that he's referred to are not the ones that the industry needs to discuss with Mick and his colleagues. The railway needs to modernise. There's a set of proposals from Mick's employers, and that needs to be worked through in detail. Some of these terms and conditions have been in place, as Mick says, for a very long time. Every industry needs to change. The railway has changed. The truth is that we are down about 20% of passengers. So, of course, there isn't the revenue coming in. Network Rail doesn't want to cut jobs at all. That's not the way forward. But there is a sensible pathway through this where Mick can get what he wants and the travelling public can get what they want and get back to work and get back to doing what they need to do on the railways.
Let's hear from Manuel and
Mick, the question I wanted to ask you is, you told us everything that led up to this. What more could you have done to have prevented this? And what do you regret that you didn't do?
Well, we've been speaking to these employers for an extended period. Ever since COVID came down in March 2020, the government contacted us immediately and convened emergency talks with ministers, the same ministers that the Tories say I won't speak to. I've spoken to every transport minister in our sector. And they said, we want you to work with us to run the railway and run the bus service and the ferry service in particular so that we can keep key workers going and goods moving. And we did that. But immediately after the first peak, they said, you're out of date, your conditions have got to go, you're too expensive. And what the problem with the railway in this country
hang on, that's not, in fairness, that's not the question you're being asked.
Yeah,
the question you're being asked is, well, do you...
So we've been working with these companies on all of these issues, and we're working with them right now. But the prescription they're giving us is too much. They're saying to my members in Network Rail, for instance, you must work 39 weeks of nights, 39 weeks of weekends at night, for no increase in wages. And in fact, in some cases, the railway is saying to our members, you must have less wages going forward, not just against inflation, but against the existing salaries. And you must take a prescription that gives you extended working hours without compensation, 5 additional hours per week. Now, we have been working tirelessly.
But Mick, the question being asked
Yeah,
is, what do you regret not doing?
I regret that we haven't got a government that will allow the companies to negotiate
that's a different answer. Let me come to Ben. Ben.
Well, I regret that we have not been able...
So, I mean, how about maybe the person who's asking hasn't considered the fact that they have literally done anything that they possibly could do, other than just rolling over and just saying, well, I guess we have to accept all of these horrendous terms and conditions. The negotiations have been taking place between employers and between the RMT. The government has hamstrung the employers by imposing obviously removing the subsidies that have usually gone into it, whilst also allowing them to take millions of pounds out of the industry. The employers and the government have both said, no, we will not, we won't give you a settlement the RMT is happy with. And so it's pretty well, if you're not going to negotiate on the terms that we would like to go with, then we'll go on strike. It's very, very simple. Like, is there anything, I mean, literally, he could have just answered the real Giga Chat answer would be, is there anything you regret? No. I regret absolutely nothing. We've done everything that we can. The ball has entirely been in the employers and the government's court since we announced strike action was taking place, and they have failed to be able to meet our demands, so we're going on strike. Very, very simple. And if everyone else in the workforce decided that they had the ability to do that by joining their own union, then they would also have the ability to be able to negotiate in that manner too.
Able to make an agreement. We've been working with them tirelessly to get that agreement, but it's not there.
Not what the person was asking. Ben.
I think I'd like to step back, if I may. That, getting caught in the debate over this particular strike.
Kind of fucking posh this cunt, Jesus.
Is missing the issue, if you don't mind me saying so. What we have here is a much bigger...
If you don't mind me saying so.
...economic malaise, which is first playing out through...
An economic malaise.
...through the rail service. What we've had, and I'm going to have a crack at the Conservative Party, if you don't mind, Rachel, forgive me, but what we've got in the Conservative Party is a party in governance that's taken us back to the 1970s. We have a party...
I mean, it's funny how we were told that Jeremy Corbyn would bring us back to the 1970s. I mean, to be fair, I miss affordable houses and I miss disco like anyone else does, apart from, people have huge investments in property and no music taste. But now the Conservative government have taken us back to the 1970s by essentially completely disregarding the needs of the working class, because of course they haven't. They're Conservatives. That's what they do. Although, to be fair, people try and claim that the 1970s are the fault of the Wilson and Callaghan governments, when actually no, it was Ted Heath was in power when actually, if you want to talk from a monetary perspective about frivolous government spending, that was at the Ted Heath's chancellor at the time who caused that issue, which then was admittedly part of a lot of those issues wasn't even down specifically to government policy. It was the oil crisis in the 70s that caused a lot of the issues that they had now. Funny, it's causing a lot of issues that we have now too. It's almost like it's not about whether the government spends or not, and it's more about other factors outside of our control. It's just, at least in the 70s, people were able to work for a decent wage for collective bargaining because the union density was much higher.
That's governed this country for 12 years. National debt is up to 100% of GDP. Taxes are at a 70-year high. Inflation is at a 40-year high. These figures and these records haven't been breached since the 1970s. And when you govern an economy like that, what you get is close to no...
But the thing is, high taxes aren't a problem by themselves. I'm not fussed about high taxes. In the 1970s, taxes were stratified in a much fairer manner than they are now, especially after we saw a national insurance rise under the Blair government, and an additional national insurance rise under the Conservative government that we have at the moment as well, for example. Right? The issue was the taxes used to be fairer because they used to be far more progressive than they are now. It's only down to the Conservatives and the neoliberal establishment of the past 4 decades, which completely have rewritten the rules from traditional Conservative governments who have been at least somewhat better than what we have now. Like, there has been no Conservative Prime Ministers who have been worse than Thatcher, Cameron, May or Johnson. They've all been they're the worst 4 Conservative Prime Ministers in history, bar none. Right? Just because they've just kind of hung on to this neoliberal nonsense. That's the real issue here. It's not about whether or not we have high tax. It's, do we have a progressive tax system or not? We had one in the 70s and we don't have one now.
No growth. And surprise, surprise, GDP in this country in 2010, when the Conservatives took over, was about £2 trillion a year. It's now £2.2 trillion a year. And if you look at wage growth in the public sector, which is particularly pertinent to Mick's position, it's gone from £555 a week in 2010 to £585 a week in 2019 before the pandemic hit. It's actually dropped since then. So you've had a 5% increase in wages in the 12-year period that the Conservative government's been in charge. And you've had inflation over that period, before the current spike of 9%. Before that 9% spike, you've had inflation of 25%. So actually, I'm going to come right to Mick's defence. What we've got is a failure in macro management of the economy. We have had real deflation in wages of 20% across all the public sector, and indeed...
You know what would help about the issues with regards to wage stagnation? More people being in unions. It is not a surprise that in countries with 80% plus union density, I don't know, the Scandinavian social democracies, people have much higher pay on the base level, right? Products aren't that much more expensive than they are here, especially not comparatively. Like, comparatively, the working classes have far more buyer power in the Scandinavian social democracies where there are high union density, and yet they still have flourishing economies as well. It's funny how that works, isn't it? Where you have people who have enough money to be able to spend can also consume more in the economy. Weird that, isn't it?
The economy. So Mick is first out of the gates, but we are going to see strikes from British Airways. We are going to see strikes from the teachers. We're going to see strikes from all those people we clapped for during the pandemic, the NHS. And the government could have headed this off. You know, this is not a necessary problem. You look at the United States, it had all the same problems we've had over the last 12 years. Their GDP has grown 50%. Ours is stagnant. It's because this government is a borrow, tax and spend government. It needs to cut taxes.
Borrow taxes? Are you crazy? Are you mental? Were you dropped on the head as a child, Ben? The last thing this government has been doing has been taxing and spending. I mean, the government has barely, the tax hasn't really come from the areas that it should do. The actual tax burden, the actual amount of tax, that their revenue that they're generating isn't particularly high. It's all being taxed off the lowest in society, rather than going after, I don't know, banking transaction levies, which they dropped, actually. They reduced the banking transaction levy, or taxing bankers' bonuses, or additional tax bans on higher income earners, or an increase in capital gains tax, or an increase in corporation tax, or even an unrealised capital gains tax, or a land value tax. These are all taxes they could have done to massively increase tax revenue, right? Or removing the tax exemption on private schools. All of these different things, progressive ways of being able to increase the actual tax income for the government, rather than what they actually have done, which is get a kind of relatively meagre amount from national insurance rises. It's the idea that these people are somehow like the current Conservative Party are Keynesian in the nature of governing the country's monetary the kind of macroeconomics is this guy lives in a different reality. He lives in clown world. He doesn't. What's this government spent on? Like, there's been some government spending during the pandemic because Boris Johnson actually believes in that shit. We had a decade of austerity. Has he just been living in another country? Has he been living in the fucking Matrix? What? What we actually have is kleptocrats. We have people in power who use the government purse to be able to give their mates money, and none of that actually gets filtered into things that wouldn't be inflationary spending, such as putting money into infrastructure, for example, which is what this country desperately needs. We do not need private companies being allowed to use public money to pay off their shareholders. It's very, very simple.
It needs to cut regulations, and it needs to have a vision for growth.
Woman here in the front. Yeah.
Rachel, going back to what you said about how the government doesn't want strikes, to my knowledge, this was not an unknown issue. The government knew that these strikes were coming. To that, I say, why was Boris Johnson at a Conservative fundraiser on Monday auctioning off dinners with himself, Theresa May and David Cameron? If he knew these strikes were coming, why did he not sit down with rail union leaders and people like Mick Lynch to come to a solution before all of this kicked off?
I'm going to get round I'm going to get round yours a little bit more, and then I'll come back to you. Yes, the man at the back in the blue shirt. Yes, that's you.
So, with IT enablement and working from home, the railway's business model has changed. You know, it can't rely on captive commuter traffic. It can't rely on high value.
That's just like a flat lie. That's just him seeing some kind of conditions and then saying, well, this must be true for everybody. This must have incredibly large macroeconomic effect that I'm just assuming is happening. When actually passenger numbers aren't even even far down from what they were previously during the pandemic, and are projected to rise back to pre-pandemic levels.
Business travel, it needs to look at a different economic model, and that means change as well as investment in the railway system.
Again, this guy's just like swallowed like conservative propaganda that he's read on Twitter, completely unquestioning, without even looking at the residual. Well, people are working from home, so in my mind that means fewer people are using trains. Not checked if that's true or not, or whether that is maps onto reality. Just assume that it's happened.
And the woman next to you.
Yeah, I totally agree with what the gentleman has just said. I think from what I've read, the railway rules and all that goes on is very draconian. And to be perfectly honest...
And even if the passenger numbers were down, that doesn't change the fact that £500 million has been taken out of the railways in profit, even during the pandemic years, right? Come on, even if passenger numbers are down, that profit is still something that could have been used to be able to give people better working conditions and living wages and better pensions. Like, that £500 million didn't come out of nowhere.
One of the main 3 pillars that Mick Lynch is asking for is for no forced redundancies. I'm sure there are many people throughout their careers here who've had redundancies due to changes in working models, their companies, and that is not realistic at all to want the government...
Oh, well, because we had it shit, that means everyone else has to have it shit. I love my race to the bottom. I love not having any kind of workplace protections at all. I love having people's lives being upturned because people would rather have, pay out millions in shareholder dividends rather than actually being able to put people onto some kind of living arrangement which sees them through issues like the coronavirus. God, these people are infuriating. Nothing can get better in these fucking liberals' minds. There is just, there's literally D-Ream. Things can never get better. I'd love to do that. I'd love to watch the Ian Duncan Smiths do a cover of that.
Or to want the railway to say, we are going to agree that there are no forced redundancies. And by the way, Mick Lynch, did you get here by train today?
Oh, no, actually, I think you'll find that he floated here on your smug self-satisfaction. Either that or he surfed on a tidal wave of conservative tears.
You can answer that in a minute. Yes, the man there in the blue polo shirt, yes.
I am a railway worker and I work in the station ticket office. And for the last 12 months...
Are you a member of the
I am a member of the RMT and I was on the picket line this morning.
Right.
And
My guy.
My concern is that it's not just the people in the offices, it's all our vulnerable passengers, it's the safety side of things that we do in the ticket offices, and the government on a wholesale closure with no plan in place of what our job role is going to be or what's going to happen with us. And it's just really frustrating. I've never known morale so low in a job.
And what do you make of the lady's point at the back, where she says insisting on no compulsory redundancies, it's a fact of life for many workers, why should you be any different?
We
I'm not saying
understand
it's
that.
pleasant, obviously,
Look,
but she's just saying
obviously we understand the situation the country's in, but the problem for us is that bodies are needed on the railway for safety reasons, if nothing else. And surely the railway is an essential service, and it needs the bodies to run an essential service. And if that's not going to happen, you're going to end up with the disasters like the rail track stuff that happened in the 90s. So we can't. And I'm just concerned.
They told us they can achieve this, no compulsory redundancies, but they're not being allowed to. They could give us this commitment. The companies have told me, face to face, they could achieve a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies.
So why don't you negotiate with them
because
on that
they
basis?
won't write it down on a piece of paper and give it to us as a commitment.
It is.
But
It's here.
No, it's not.
It
I thought
is.
you
That's
didn't
the
interfere
letter.
in these negotiations.
I've
But you've got a Network Rail letter.
I've got the Network Rail letter here.
That does not give us...
OK, none of us
that
can
does
read
not
it.
give
So
us
do you want to read out the relevant bit, Rachel?
Will you read out where
But
it
it doesn't
says...
say...
Well, look,
guarantee
someone
of
read it out, for
compulsory
heaven's sake. Rachel, you got it. You read out the relevant bit.
When the changes are implemented, our need for maintenance and work delivery staff is likely to reduce. We will need to commence formal redundancy consultation with our trade unions. No, it's not. Again, while we do not have to agree those redundancy with our trade unions, we would much prefer to implement them with your agreement and cooperation. We very much hope and anticipate that sufficient employees will volunteer for redundancy to avoid the need to make anyone compulsory redundant.
So
that's your employer.
That's literally not a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies. Does this Conservative MP, does he think that we're all stupid? Do you think we can't understand any English fucking language? Does she not think that we understand that what that actual sentence means isn't that we can guarantee no compulsory redundancies? It's, if there are some people who want to take voluntary ones, then we won't do it, which means that there are going to be redundancies, and it's all entirely contingent on whether or not people will volunteer to do so. Because if they don't do, then there will be compulsory redundancies. That's it. That's what that sentence means. And she thinks that we don't understand it. That we just so like, I guess she probably went to private school and thinks that we're all fucking thickos because we went to state schools and think, oh well, I could just use word games to make these people think I've said something when I haven't. Is she for real?
Guarantee of no compulsory redundancy.
It's very clear.
Does it say no compulsory redundancy?
No, of course it doesn't, because as the
told me it
lady
did.
said,
You
no,
just told me it
no,
did say.
She literally admits it. Does this say no compulsory redundancies? Oh, actually, of course it doesn't. There you go. They're simple. Next question, move on. You've shown that you're either a liar or a fucking idiot.
organisation can give that guarantee, but you can see
Network Rail
here.
gave us that guarantee for 12 years
You
on
can
the
see
clock.
here in black and white, it says they want to do this with your agreement. And
But it
if
doesn't say
you want
what
to
you said it
negotiate
said.
with them, you can
That's your
protect
problem.
the jobs of that
It
gentleman
doesn't
over
say
there.
what you said it said.
Well, what I said, it
I
said.
think we're going round and round here. I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen.
But
Let's hang on a minute.
You said it said no
Hang on,
compulsory
Nick.
redundancy.
Anne is buffing to come in.
Yeah, my father was a member of a trade union, and my first week coming to London for my new job, he said the first thing you need to do.
Hey, it's Chug Logic gang. Let's go. Welcome, Raiders. Welcome, Raiders. How are we all doing? Hope we're doing good.
Is join the union, protect your conditions. And therefore I have a lot of sympathy for the trade union movement. But I think we need a far more sophisticated response here. It isn't just guarantees of job savings, it's transition plans. What are we going to do to make the...
Please, if you are a Raider, please click on my face down that corner, I think it is, or refresh the page. Yeah, this is the guaranteed hate raid. Let's fucking go. If you want to click my name, that'll put you back onto my page. Drop all of the Chud Logic emotes. Let's go. Let's do it.
Railways, a even more high-tech industry, and what do we need...
I would ask my existing viewers to go follow Chud Logic, but I'm pretty sure either all of them do, and also I only had like 5 people watching. Hey, thank you for the follow, ignoring chat.
...to do to retrain people and give people a path. The key workers, the people on the front line during the pandemic were out there where the rest of us are working from home. I think we actually need to consider that when we plot
Cheers for the follow, Winston.
the future of these industries.
I agree with you. I agree with you entirely. So we go through that transition with a guarantee of no compulsory redundancy, and we can start a deal.
Right.
Doesn't say it on that document.
But you
Hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. Let me bring in
So if they said it to you-
For those who weren't aware before of unless you were looking at the stream title, this is the question time from Thursday evening. They're currently talking about issues with regards to the rail strike and the issues surrounding that. There's a union leader, Mick Lynch. I'm sure loads of you have seen floating around Twitter or in the YouTube sphere. So let's go.
Why don't you go back and negotiate with them? Yes.
I'll come back to you in a minute. Nick.
Well, I have to say, Rachel lifting that letter is the first finger I've seen lifted by a government minister to do anything to resolve the dispute. And I've driven here from Wales this evening, and there is no dispute between the Welsh Government and Transport for Wales. And there isn't a dispute because the Welsh Government sat down through its social partnership approach, it put the time in, and it actually bothered to find a solution.
But it was also a 3...
And also, like, you look at Merseyrail. Merseyrail have literally just organised and negotiated a 7.5% pay rise with the RMT on their lines for their workers. It was very simple. There was a negotiation. They agreed their pay rise. No strike happened. Very, very simple. If you allow people to negotiate, they can find settlements.
0.3% agreement, whereas the RMT are after 7%.
Well, there's also an issue around conditions as well, which I'm sure Mick can speak to in a moment. But the point is, you had an active government taking responsibility that wanted to prevent strikes from happening. You just haven't got that with
Merseyrail.
The Conservatives at Westminster. Grant Shapps won't actually even pick up the phone and speak to the RMT to try to deal with this. And it is, I'm afraid, all of a piece with this government at Westminster. Try to get a passport. You can't get a passport now because of the backlog. You want a driving licence. You can't get a driving licence. You want to fly somewhere. Your flight gets cancelled. There's the cost of living crisis and the squeeze. And what's the great idea of this week from the government? They want to increase bankers' bonuses.
If you're not getting 11%, you're going backwards. And there was before you guys all joined in, there was a previous guy who was making the point that since 2010, inflation has gone up to 25%, and average pay has only gone up 5%. So we've already taken a 20% pay cut. I don't know if the maths on that works. I'm not good enough at that. But there's already been a real terms pay cut because of the wage stagnation in line with inflation over the past decade. So that's pre-pandemic. That's before the inflation that we're having now. So it's getting even worse beyond that. So if we're not getting an additional 11%, we're taking a pay cut. So people asking for things like 7.5%, which is what the RMT are asking from the main rail networks outside of Merseyrail at the moment in this current dispute. Exactly, I think it shouldn't really be a massive issue. It's not going to cause a wage price spiral if you get 7.5% pay rise in the face of 11% inflation, or possibly even 12%. on current projections. So it's absolute nonsense. A bunch of the kind of the fear mongering, scaremongering that's been going on with regards to this.
This is a government that is completely out of touch.
And also, there's the British Airways strike that's going to be planned to go down to the summer, which obviously all of the media have been scaring of, oh, people's holidays are going to be ruined by potential strike action. When the only reason that they're striking is that they accepted a 10% pay cut during the pandemic, when people weren't even taking any flights. And British Airways haven't agreed to then reinstate that 10% now that people are flying again. And so they're not even asking for a pay rise. They're just asking for their pay to go back to where it was pre-pandemic. So the idea that is somehow somehow something that people shouldn't be asking for, or whether it's out of touch, or that it's nonsensical, it blows my my tiny mind.
In fact, the government is saying that's not what they're doing. But, so when you were listening to the gentleman in the audience there, you were on a picket line this morning. Would you join him? And would you support Labour MPs standing on a picket line with that man there?
Zeos, to be fair, a lot of the train drivers aren't even striking. They're covered by ASLEF, not RMT. It's mostly actually support staff, because the issues with regards to changes in the contract is going to affect maintenance workers, is going to make their job harder, make them work more weekends, work more nights, and also could have an impact on maintenance and safety of the rail network, which affects both staff and passengers. And the average salary of the people that are going on strike, who are represented by RMT specifically, during the strike action period, their median pay is only £31,000 a year. So pretty much close to what the median salary is in the UK right now. And some of them are on minimum wage. These people need pay rises. And it's not even just about pay, it's also about conditions, about contracts, about pensions, and about redundancies too. So the idea that it's somehow just about train drivers' salaries is a very clever trick the media has tried to play to make it so that people fight amongst the working class, rather than actually look at the proper class dichotomy here between the people who are raking in millions of pounds worth in shareholder dividends and profits they're being made, rather than the issue with who gets paid more than the other in a race to the bottom.
What I am focusing on, and that's why I haven't been joining the picket line, what I am focusing on is firstly at Westminster exposing the failure of this government to lift a finger to prevent these strikes from happening. And what I will continue to do at Westminster is to try to make absolutely sure that we pressurise the government to get around the table and solve the strike. I back a deal. And listen, my father...
Yes, North Country, when I did get a big raid, I got ready from Shuttle Shake. Never used to have this many viewers.
He was retired now as a steel worker. He was in the steel strike. He was off for 14 weeks. I know exactly the sacrifices that strikers go through. I know exactly the disruption that is caused by the public. That's why I didn't want to see the strikes happen. The government should do more, and the government should now be resolving this situation.
Well, I mean, I completely agree with Nick that actually the Prime Minister missed a golden opportunity to invite Mick in and have a chat with him.
Thank you, North Countryman. It's much appreciated. I know we disagree on a lot, but you've always been incredibly cordial on panels, and I enjoy having you in chat.
But this is about fundamental governance failures. It's not just about negotiations. It's not just about conditions and pay. This is about a breakdown in a government that doesn't know how to handle its own policy of lockdown and how to emerge from it. When we came out of lockdown, what we experienced was a supply shock. We had price of fuel going through the roof. We had supply chains across the globe broken. And the Prime Minister and this government had no plan for that. Instead of making it easier for the working classes and for the middle classes, by reducing taxes on them, they increased national insurance. The private sector had been kicked in the shins for 2 years, and they want to increase corporation tax rate. Small, and we haven't talked about small and medium-sized businesses, by the way, who I think, and sole practitioners, who have suffered much more than anyone who has the comfort of employment. You know, they have been driven out of business because of business rates, but no one talks about that in government. This government, before you get round a negotiating table, needs to assess how it's going to grow this country, the economy of this country, and how it's going to make people wealthy again.
Woman there, you were nodding your head at that in a blue shirt.
Businesses have to change. They have to adapt. It's a fundamental of being in business. You absolutely have to change with what you experience economically.
So do you think the RMT is taking the wrong approach?
Yes, and look what happened to the dinosaurs.
Look at this face. Look at that face. That just screams, can I speak to the manager? Anyone who's worked in customer service, you've known that face. You've seen that face if you've ever worked in customer service. That the face that tells you, well, the law states that you have to sell it to me at the price that's on the label. She's like ultra giga Karen at this point. Yeah, if the dinosaurs really got wiped out by the asteroids because they didn't accept the conditions of modernization being pressed upon them by the dinosaur bush. I have no idea what point she's trying to make here. I didn't get the vaccine after I'd been bitten. I mean, like, there's the crazy thing is that a lot of these people, especially the boomers in the audience, the Facebook does not have permission to use them to use my photographs. Like boomer people, they've probably she probably doesn't know that she's become an internet meme. Although, do you remember? I don't know if anyone remembers the 80K guy. So it was up to the 2019 election, I think it was. Richard Bergen was on Question Time. There was a guy in the audience saying they want to raise my taxes. But they said they lied to us, telling us they'd only raise taxes on the top 5% of earners. And they were like, but they're raising my taxes. How much do you earn? £80,000. I was like, yeah, I'm not even in the top 50% of earners at £80,000, mate. And Richard Bergen just didn't know how to answer it. They're just so blatantly nowhere near being true. Because 80K is where the fifth percentile starts, right? When the median wage in this country is £27,000. And he instantly became a meme overnight. He had to shave his beard. He lives on the Isle of Man, right? He's like a motorbike racer on the Isle of Man. He had to shave his beard because people kept coming up to him in the street and telling him he was a prick. It just went viral overnight by being a prat doesn't know what they're talking about on Question Time. Look out for the little guy, true North Countryman. True and based. Everyone's a meme for 15 minutes. I'm assuming in my time being an internet content creator, I will go incredibly viral. What do you think of the notion this is less about making profits, rather general way of governance failure designed to systematically oppress the people of Britain, and just move the back towards landlords plus serfs? I don't think so. What we always have to remember, especially with Boris Johnson government, that nothing is ever being done in the sake of some kind of ideology anymore. There is no conservative ideology running through the current Tory administration. Well, maybe slightly, in that they kind of have a conservative culture. They have a culture of looking down on the classes they deem to be lower than them, with this kind of divine right to rule mentality. But there's no ideology driving their policies, really. They'll just do whatever they can using whatever leverage that they have to be able to win the next election. They're continually in election mode because Boris Johnson does not care about what gets put through government as long as it keeps him in power. He just doesn't care. And he's surrounded himself with an entire team full of yes men who'll just do what he wants. But like when they just announced the windfall tax in the wake of Partygate, right? There was actually a big kind of like a mini war going on between the Premiership and the Chancellor with regards to what they were going to do with regards to fiscal policy to get people through the cost of living crisis, where Rishi Sunak, who is very ideologically driven, didn't want to put money back into the economy through the issue of bonds to be able to get people through the cost of living crisis, especially those on-state benefits, because he thought it would be harmful to the economy under these kind of neoliberal monetarist lens, right? But Boris Johnson's like, no, we have to put it through, because if we don't put it through, A, we can't distract people from Partygate, and B, people will hate me even more than they do now. It's just a big popularity contest as far as Boris Johnson's concerned, and he'll use whatever state power that he has access to be able to keep it that way. The decline from Burke to Boris is quite sad. I mean, true. Even as someone who vehemently disagrees with with Burkean conservatism, again, is obviously based on another noble lie. Like, at least that there was an idea that they could create a good society out of it. But in a utilitarian sense, at least good pause, yeah. But in a utilitarian sense, at least Boris's desire to be popular has led him to get people who are on state benefits through a cost of living crisis, which they wouldn't have done if they had a competent conservative like David Cameron or Theresa May in charge. They would have implemented more austerity, which ironically would have caused the lack of economic growth that we saw through all of the austerity period under David Cameron, where we had to wait 5, 6, 7 years to see any growth in the economy because nothing was ever being stimulated due to the double dip recession that we got from because of a project of austerity that was implemented, but ideologically by George Osborne. Not to mention all the people that died, all the disabled people who lost their lives due to conservative policies of austerity. I don't have a Discord link on there. Let me. I don't actually have a Discord link to hand. Sorry. I mean, 2008 was really Thatcher's fault. Although the Blair government didn't really do enough to mitigate that because they were also ideologically tied to like the neoliberal deregulation that led to the financial crisis, right? But even so, it was the Thatcherite regulation that really caused it, and it's quite incredibly ironic. Like I did a video on this recently about how it's probably a little unfair on New Labour that they got blamed for the entirety of the knock-on effects of the global financial crisis in the UK when they didn't really do very much to cause it. Yet a lot of the issues that we have now, like the issues with the housing crisis, the issue with what's happened with regards to PFIs, selling off the gold, all that stuff, the things that were kind of institutional problems, that they help get even worse due to them not properly reversing the neoliberal reforms that were made under Thatcher and their rebranding towards a kind of third way political platform. They don't get blamed for the issues that we have now because that's what conservative policymakers already want to do. They can't attack Blair without attacking themselves. They have to attack them on the grounds of the global financial crisis, which isn't the fault of Labour. And Labour's acquisition of RBS and engaging in quantitative easing in the wake of the pandemic, in the wake of the global financial crisis, was reasonably sound solution to the issues that we had. So they get blamed for something that wasn't their fault, and they took reasonable steps to mitigate. They don't get blamed for any of the issues that they helped cause, that are causing such huge amounts of societal kind of toxin right now. Which is it's really weird that we can't critique Blair for his his wholesale adoption of neoliberalism actually happened, but everyone continues to critique him for stuff that he didn't even do. Although at least we all agree that the Iraq War was bad, unless you're Kevin Castley.
Well, they were around for a very long time.
They're not with us now, though, are they?
Million years. Okay. But we are negotiating change. We deal with change all of the time on the railway. We apply technology in ticket offices, on board trains, in rolling stock, on the delivery of traction power. We deal with
Mick, while
change
we've
all
got
of
you
the
here,
time.
what about
Negotiate
Mick?
it.
While we've got you here, what about some of these things? And I don't know the rights and wrongs of this. So the Network Rail chief executive Andrew Haines has said. He said, for example, one of the things he wants to change and that you're not allowing is that maintenance teams are responsible for geographical areas. So, for example, if you have a maintenance team who are at King's Cross Station, they are not allowed to go to Euston Station, which is just a 5-minute walk. Is that right? Or?
It's right because they are two different regions. And
but they're 5 minutes walk away.
Listen, the regions of the railway were constructed by private
I love the audience and Fiona Bruce just assuming that they know more about what goes on in rail maintenance than the guy who's the head of the RMT. Like literally the Gensec of the union who represents the workers who work in these fields, and then all the people in the audience saying, "No, that's wrong. I reckon I know enough to be able to know what people should or shouldn't be. I reckon I know more than Mick Lynch does about this issue." Oh God, I can't believe that he's undermining my misinformed ad hoc reckon on this incredibly complex piece of rail maintenance.
And the assets and equipment on them are entirely different on each region.
Manual timesheets?
We have digital timesheets and manual timesheets. You wouldn't be surprised that if you're out on the ballast in Inverness on a February, you may not have a computer with
Mick,
you.
that
use
just
manual
doesn't
timesheets.
fly.
That's up to the company.
That's an absolutely Victorian attitude.
We are not.
How on earth can you call that sensible?
How on earth your Victorian attitude?
Because it's.
We literally, and it's like you're absolutely right. One equation. This is an explicit problem that is due to the franchisee system that was implemented by the major government in the 90s when they sold off the rail network to private companies. And the fact that all these different regions all have kind of different ways in which they operate, all these different maintenance procedures, which you have to do loads of retraining to be able to get people to do amongst loads of different other stations, right? Essentially to be able to cut costs, overwork existing employees to be able to create additional redundancies in these issues, to be able to lower the amount of people who are in the workforce. It's just crazy to me. Easy to see how bonkers government and the media are in each of the three plus Commonwealth and EU and beyond. UK is rather wonderfully cucked. Media and Gen Pop is wonderfully manipulable. Yeah, absolutely 100% true. Like, I think I think Mick Lynch really has done over the past couple of weeks really has kind of shown up the UK media for being entirely ideologically captured at this point, really. I guess the issue we have is it's the issue of the class system, really. The amount of people who just kind of get endemically get pushed through public school and then back into Oxbridge, who then get kind of fast tracked into media careers, um, who have the control over the way in which the discourse is run. Even on the left, you look at the people who actually do the writing for someone like, I don't know, The Guardian or whatever. These people are still, the vast majority of them, people who either went through public school or who went to Oxbridge. Even the most kind of prominent kind of socialist journalists who get get access to mainstream media representation. People like Grace Blakely, people like Owen Jones, both of them went to Oxford, which is less of an issue in the United States, especially because it's bigger. Whereas obviously you can there's enough like journalism, the people who come out with a kind of PPE qualifications from Oxbridge. There's enough of them being churned out every year to be able to continually fill any kind of vacant positions in journalism in the UK, which you can't really do the same in the United States. You guys who's like filling his bald shoes is a good debate too. True, Ziad. Eric Blow worked for MI6 and propaganda, and then when he started to write, he took up the pen name or George Orwell. Love it. Yeah, literally, we have 2 universities, and then there was something crazy. Also, when you look at like private schools, I think 51% of people within the journalism industry in the UK come from private school backgrounds or went to private school, when only 7% of the general population went to private school. But wait, they've created like an educational apartheid with the way in which the private school system has created a number of people who can just walk into any career that they want because of where they went to school, because their parents are rich. This ridiculous, like, this gaping chasm of opportunity between those who come out of the private school system and those who come out of the state school system is completely absurd to me.
Different area. What
It's
people
just
can't
true.
go
The
from
engineering
Victoria to Charing
infrastructure,
Cross.
the
That's
engineering
just
Hang on,
ludicrous.
let him talk. Hang on. Yes.
It's an absolutely ludicrous, unworkable situation.
Durham would be the next one after that one equation.
I employ 35 people. We have to change with what the customer demands.
So do we.
It's hope.
So
no,
do we.
You clearly don't, Mick, because you've got people in Charing Cross unable to maintain Victoria. It's a ludicrous situation.
Hang on, Mick, I'll come back
We
to
are
you.
negotiating now.
Mick, I will come back to you. Let me just hear a bit more from the audience, and then I'll give you a chance to
Not our
respond.
working practices. No, we won't.
You will be the death. Look at the railways now. Utterly hopeless. Terrible places.
The railways are hopeless because of privatisation, mate. Not because of anything that the RMT have done. Fucking hell.
To travel in.
Well, the other one, mate, it's got bells on.
You've got customers crashing out left and right. You've got a 20% fall since the pandemic, and you're still demanding more. You're demanding.
And £500 million of profit's been taken out of the railways even after COVID.
Twice as much as is on the table now. You've got a 3% offer on the table. You're demanding 7. You're demanding the guarantee of no compulsory redundancies. How utterly ridiculous is that in 2022?
Let's hear from the...
Yeah, literally, again, I guess I would try and reason with him on the grounds that, maybe the working class should be fighting to be able to maintain some kind of level of personal standard of living, and by using the unions to do so. But then again, he's a business owner. He's the bourgeois. He is, quote unquote, the enemy, really, at this point. So he doesn't want to have to negotiate with unions, because that would mean we would go on fewer trips into the French Alps and wouldn't have to drink as nicer wine because it would be taking as much profit. 500 million, sorry, COJ. Sorry.
Railway worker in our audience. What's your response to that?
My issue is that
I have previously said 500 million. The 500 million is the correct figure.
the reason it's so fragmented is because of the franchise system. There's 15 or 16 toxins and Network Rail. How are they supposed to communicate when they're all...
Mick wants the whole country to
Okay,
rest.
hang on,
Sort
sir.
that out.
Yeah, but the thing is...
It's completely unacceptable.
Hang on. We've heard you. Thank you. But let's let someone else speak as well.
The thing is, if it was nationalised all under one banner, then you can do those things, but you can't do. It's like going...
I love how the audience is just so completely one-sided. I guess it is Stratford upon Avon, and BBC do weight their audiences based on the venue rather than the general population, right? And Stratford is an incredibly fucking Tory area. But the country supports rail nationalisation. Actually even said that she would never nationalise the railways. That's a John Major issue, not a Thatcher issue. Amazingly, I'm having to defend Margaret Thatcher with regards to this, and like the fact that it's just this audience who are in the position with which that they would sneer at the idea of rail nationalisation when it's supported by huge swathes of society. Really, at this point, let me just fix my camera. And he's right. You could solve this by nationalising it, by having a single operator for all of these particular. Oh, my camera's fucked up. Let me just turn that off 1 sec. Oh, that's chat. You could solve all of these issues with regards to compatibility by just having a single operator who is the government who runs all of it, right? It's very, very simple.
It's a Sainsbury's and doing something that has then you can't do it. And that's the way it works. That's the way the franchise system works.
Okay, let's hear from the man here in the front, the blue shirt.
What's wrong with compulsory redundancy if you are really...
I could spend like hours and hours talking about how completely bananas the franchise system is in the UK. Completely bananas. It's just the most unworkable system. Like either have it all private, right? Just privatize. Don't have like Network Rail anymore, and just have different people running different routes. Let the private companies maintain the actual network itself or whatever, or have it all nationalized, right? The way in which the franchise system works at the moment is the most bonkers thing you imagine a stupid policy that could be implemented with regards to the franchise system. You name it, they could have done it, right? The stupid stuff like having individual private companies owning the rail stations. So if you're a different company, you just run through because you want to get charged for stopping at it. It's completely crazy. There's no reason to have the weird franchise system that we do at the moment, and that's why in Europe they just have a much better, more efficient, and more popular rail network than we do. Right, let's get this fucking camera working.
That's the way the franchise system works.
Okay, let's hear from the man here in the front, the blue shirt.
What's wrong with compulsory redundancy?
Also, the bin workers are going to be striking as well. One occasion, although bin workers in Derbyshire, in Chesterfield, they just won a 7.5% pay rise, and so the strikes were completely avoided. It's funny how when people actually come to the negotiating table to try and form some kind of agreement, strike action just gets avoided, right? Unfortunately, we have a Network Rail that's being hamstrung by government ministers who refuse to let them negotiate in good faith because they have orders from the top down to want to act in the interest of the government, of the Tories, rather than the interest of the workers or the companies who even run the franchises. It's a completely balmy system.
If you are redeployed.
Well, we're seeking a redeployment agreement and they won't give us one. So if people are displaced because of organisational change, which we deal with every week of the year, we can get a redeployment policy and get people different jobs in different fields and different roles. What we need is an agreement to do that. We haven't got one. What they're saying is you must accept all of the change without negotiation, virtually, and you have to accept any redundancies come out of it. What we're saying to them is give us the guarantee, secure our members' jobs, we will accept the change as it comes along and we'll talk about it and negotiate it. We negotiate change every day. We used to have 400,000 members. We're a much smaller union because the railway has shed jobs due to technology. All of that has been done under the banner of no compulsory redundancy, and people can choose to leave the industry when they're ready, or they can choose to go into a new role. That's what we're after, and that's been the arrangement in the railway for a long time. There's nothing wrong with those values, and if all companies had those, we'd have a better society rather than dumping people on the dole at the behest of private sector companies.
The woman at the back, in the very middle. Yeah.
Stratford-on-Avon played host to Rail Live today and yesterday. It's like the largest railway expo in the country. It was empty because no one could get there, which I just think is completely ironic. It's a place of innovation and technology, people coming together to discuss how the railway can come together better. And yet, where was everyone? No one could get there because you were using archaic values and striking.
Okay.
Archaic values and striking. I'm absolutely just flabbergasted. Like, how do you reason with these people? Oh, using literally the only thing that you actually have in your power to be able to bargain for a better life for yourself and a better wage and better conditions and better terms. That's archaic, is it? I guess what you just want everyone working on the gig economy, do you? Miss Tory, Miss Audience Tory, fucking hell.
We'll hear from the young woman in the front in a white top.
I'd like to go back to Rachel's point about how the government doesn't want strikes. Following the news today that British Airways workers will be striking over the summer, surely the government could have prevented these strikes if it had not supported fire and rehire.
So can I just say that that's completely wrong to say the government does not support fire and rehire. In fact, the government has legislated to prevent fire and rehire. The British Airways dispute that you've just mentioned is a private matter. British Airways are a private company. The government's got nothing to do with British Airways. We very much hope that they will resolve that with their workers. I'm sure that they will. I think they've got some experience of disputes with their workforce. Of course, they need to negotiate that. That is not the government's job to negotiate with British Airways and their staff.
OK, let's hear a little bit more from the audience before I move on. Yes, the man there in the grey jacket and grey shirt, yes.
I think the main thing that we're seeing now is that conflict doesn't solve anything. Transformation solves things. Now, I agree that we need better worker rights, but we need that across the board. British Airways is going to evolve. There are...
If you want better workers' rights, mate, join a fucking union and bargain for them. They are not going to give it to you if you ask nicely, if you're a good boy. You have to play hardball, as Ash Sarkar said on Good Morning Britain extremely clearly.
Airlines that have come over from the US, that have come to the UK, and are more efficient, they're more effective, they're cheaper. Now, that does not mean less jobs. It just means everybody needs to get together and actually transform the railways. That means investment from government. It means workers actually getting what they need. We've heard from a guy there that knows what the problems are. Fix the problems. Stop talking about it.
OK, let's hear from the man next to you.
I think there's an awful lot of effort gone into the PR campaign from both sides. We're using the public as a judge and jury. If you'd spent half the time just sitting down around a negotiating table, we might be somewhere.
Okay.
They've been negotiating. They've been wanting to negotiate. The government has hamstrung the negotiations.
Okay, last point from the man here in the cap in the front.
Literally, just fix it, five head.
If Boris Johnson called a snap general election and the Labour Party won a landslide victory, how would the Labour Party prevent strikes across multiple industries that are being talked about and threatened?
If you want to know what Labour would do in power, look no further than Wales, where Labour is in power. And what Labour has done in power in Wales is to have a social partnership approach, getting trade unions, getting employers around the table and hammering out solutions. No, it's not glamorous. It's not something we're out on the media.
So the teachers that are threatening to go or threatening to hold a ballot, would that not apply to Wales as well?
Well, but the Welsh government...
It would, wouldn't it?
Education is devolved to the Welsh government, so the Welsh government...
The only reason why the teachers have balloted for strike action is because they tried to negotiate and they weren't getting a good enough settlement from the people who were employing them, which is the government. It's like, it's not rocket science. You say, well, what happened under Labour? We would actually enter into negotiations, right? And...
clearly does have its own education policy, and of course we'll see how that develops in Wales. But my point is this: the Welsh government is an active government that brings people together to stop strikes. It doesn't react. No, it doesn't react by saying nothing to do with us. Which
SVXON. I think you're 100% correct there.
You see the position at Westminster.
But there's a fundamental problem here. Costs since 2010 have gone up 35%.
What's interesting, Warren Equation, is they haven't been indoctrinated by it as much as kind of the media have been trying to do so. Like, they've not tried to manufacture people's consent against the union movement, and it's not worked, right? We saw from the polling by Savanta Comrades, it's a majority of people support the strikes. It's only 34% of people who are against the strike action taking place with regards to the railways, right? Like 60-70% of people believe the government's not done enough to stop it. They think that they should know that the government should be negotiating directly with the unions in these instances, right? Like there's a huge there's no like public huge kind of like public opinion that is against the unions in this state, despite the media's response to this being wholesale demonization of the union movement, regardless, from basically most sides that aren't like the Daily Mirror. Like that seems to be the only kind of mainstream piece of like media who's been wholesale in favor of the unions in these instances. And I guess part of that probably is just due to how well Mick Lynch has performed on camera.
And wages have gone up 5%. You know, you can't square that circle. So no amount of sitting around a table is going to get you over that hurdle. No. You need
the issue is people say, oh, that will take us back to the 1970s. Like Arthur Scargill wanted revolution, right? British steelworkers got a 20% pay rise, which is way above inflation. If you want to blame like a wage price spiral having an issue, then you can blame Scargill for essentially using militant unions to try and create a revolution from scratch. Like then maybe you'd have a point, but that's not what people are asking for. People are asking for their jobs to be protected. They're asking for contracts not to be torn up and then essentially sold back to them at worse rates, which is basically just fire and rehire at this point. And they're asking for pay rises lower than inflation, 7%, 6%, 8%, and when inflation is 11% and possibly going to be reaching 12% by the end of the year. It's nothing like what happened in the 1970s, and this bizarre comparison has to fucking stop, because the situations are completely different. And bless his heart, I love Arthur Scargill, right? Personal hero. But he was using the union movement to try and create a revolution in the way that people like Mick Lynch and Dave Ward and Sharon Graham really aren't doing so. They just want to get their workers a fair pay for a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, in line with something close to but not above inflation. It's not rocket science.
For policies.
Or in the case of British Airways, having their pay cut, reinstated back to their pay pre-pandemic levels. They're not even asking for a pay rise in line with inflation. They just want to have their pay back to where it was before they took a pay cut due to the passenger shortages during the coronavirus pandemic.
That, we've got a real issue with the cost of living in this country. Actually, I don't think it's a thing. It's not about wages. It's about getting the cost of living down. We are a highly regulated, and I've come back to it, it sounds like I'm banging a drum, highly taxed economy. And I'm not talking about reducing taxes on the rich. I'm talking about reducing taxes which are regressive, that hit the working classes, small and medium-sized businesses, reducing those taxes, generating growth. We're not getting out of this
I
without
can't believe I'm agreeing with this property developer.
growth.
You made that
Absolutely.
briefly, Nick.
And you asked me what the Labour government would do. We'd have a strategy for growth. The short term, what we should be doing is VAT from energy.
Yeah, did you see the BBC ran like fucking 5 articles? I don't know whether it's 5 or not. They ran a load of articles. There's a bunch of sob stories about, actually, we had tickets to go and see 70s progressive rock band, yes. Now, because of the strikes, we won't be able to go and see them. Or we might have to arrange different transport. Oh, boo fucking who, mate? I'm sorry. What do you think? I guess yes may not be around forever, but quite frankly, I think that is a fly in the ointment with regards to the working conditions of the people who actually man the railways in the first place. Just continuous things like all people's life experiences they might miss out on 1 week in which the railway staff are going on strike. I mean, I don't think yes would be very good in 2022. I'm not gonna lie, like. And even then, like, I'm sure that if you just come back the next day, they'll still be in the middle of playing Yours Is No Disgrace at that point. They'll still be in the middle of like the solo section. Just go back the next day. They'll be in the middle of some other album that lasts 3 fucking hours.
You should be cutting business rates, by the way, to help those small businesses. The national insurance rise is a profound mistake, and then we need a strategy for growth and investment. We should be investing £28 billion each and every year on the transition to net zero, the renewable energy that we need, the home insulation that we need. But above all, a strategy for growth is precisely what this country needs and why this government is failing.
Okay.
Sorry? There's another question from Sonia, the disrespected pay.
Feel free to answer.
So, I mean, Sonia asked that question, and it was about public sector workers. And I think public sector workers have been done down for a long time, not particularly the railway. I'm not going to go on about that. But there are a whole strata of people in this country that have been subjected to this form of austerity for an extended period. Nearly 12 years now, that have had pay suppressed. And that's what it's about. It's about making workers cheaper for the government. And that can only go on for so long, and it causes disruption in the society. It causes people to be alienated from what they're doing.
And when the government says if they keep... I'm going to say this for you, Rachel, since you're sitting quiet as a mouse. If the government says, if we give large...
yes, famous Conservative spokeswoman Fiona Bruce doing the Tories' jobs for them because they won't do it themselves. This is definitely impartial, isn't it?
Increases in public sector wages, that would drive inflation up.
Well, inflation's gone up, and the problem is that prices are chasing wages. Wages are chasing prices, not the other way around. We've had a lot of people, whether in the private sector or the public sector, all in small businesses, who've not had a rise for a very, very long time, and they're starting to really feel the pinch. We've got a society where people in full-time employment are having to take state benefits, and some of them are having to go to food banks. That cannot continue. We've got care workers and other workers, not just nurses, and everybody talks about nurses, but all sorts of people in the public sector, in the councils, who I think are completely undervalued, and they're starting to think, I need to stand up and get some dignity at work so I can get a better standard of living. And that means some of us that are doing better may have to give up some of what we have and transfer it to them through some kind of government mechanism, because it's not right. That means progressive tax so that people earn a decent living and have a decent living to live on.
I think we need to understand where this cost of living...
True and based. It's 100%, and as I said previously, it's 100% that wages are chasing prices. The wage increases that are being asked for by the unions aren't even like at the level of inflation. They're below inflation pay rises that they're asking for. So still a real terms pay cut, just something that be able to mitigate issues with regards to the cost of living crisis. Like I said this previously on the stream, we're looking at inflation of 11%. Actual pay for people in salaried employment. Dan Simpson, thank you for the raid. Hope you had a good stream. Much appreciated. It's good to see you as always. But when you look at actual salaried employment in the UK, over the past 3 years or so, we've only seen pay increases of 2%, right, amongst actual salaried employees. Whereas overall, we're looking at overall increases of about 4.7%. But the difference between the overall wage increase and the salaried wage increase is because we've seen an increase in bonuses being paid out to people who work in the financial sector. These people do not need extra bonuses. These people do not need pay rises. It is the working classes of this country, the people on the bottom rung of the ladder, the people who work in the service industry, who work in the construction, who work in or all of these other different industries who who basically aren't which are regular salaried employees who earn median wage or below. These are the people who need to see these pay rises, and they're not seeing them because we have incredibly low union density. It's pretty embarrassing. The government has been spending, or Boris Johnson, I guess, has been spending loads of times at PMQs saying, oh, well, look how good we're doing with our economy. There are now more vacancies in the economy for jobs than there are people searching for work. Unemployment is at the lowest level that it's been since the 1970s, right? And then that's an incredible self-own, considering that even though they admit that we have a tight labour market, wages haven't been rising. They're what 9% behind inflation, in a kind of post-pandemic world. Despite the fact that if we have more jobs available than there are people looking for jobs, the competition should drive wages. But it's not. And the reason why it's not driving is because union density is at the lowest it's been since the 1940s. The lowest union density in 80 years, right? And that was when people were dying in the fucking war, right? And not just union density either. If the total number of people who are in trade unions, like on a kind of discrete level, is lower than it was in the 1940s, right? So it's not just less dense; there are also just fewer people in trade unions overall, so they can't collectively bargain for the high wages that they need. The advent of things like the gig economy and zero-hours contracts, insecure employment, all of this has led to an economy in which all of the power is being held by the bourgeois and being used as leverage against people who are members of the working class, so much so we have to deal with precarious employment, we have to take on multiple jobs, we have to work additional hours just to be able to make ends meet. When really what we should be seeing, an incredibly tight labour market, is the union power being used to bargain with these particular industries who need to be able to hire more people and offer them better money with which to do so, to be able to get that's what we should be seeing in this tight labour market, but we're not seeing it because there's just not enough people in unions, and the advent of the gig economy has just put paid to the kind of stable employment that we expected as members of the working class during the post-war social democratic kind of consensus that we had for about 25 years pre neoliberal reforms under Thatcher, or 35 years even, rather.
Living increase is coming from. And I think, people talk about the wage sort of spiral. I think at the moment, inflation is not being caused by wage increases. What we have at the moment is about 80% of inflation is caused by energy, fuel, food. And 20% is coming from the supply chain issues and the fact that a lot of people haven't gone back into the workforce post-pandemic. So what we really need to do is, the Bank of England raising interest rates won't actually solve this sort of inflation. What we really need at the moment is concerted effort to get the food out of Ukraine to resolve some of these supply chain issues.
But in the meantime, Anne, the government could have reduced tax on fuel.
You've made the point many times about reducing tax, but then we hear. Just let's hear from Anne. Hang on, let me hear from Anne.
Yeah. I hate to be like Captain Hindsight here, and I said it last time we talked about energy issues when we were watching Question Time, but this really does speak to the fact that we had decades. We had decades of transition to a green energy economy. We had decades of people telling us that global warming was an issue. I learned about that growing up in school in the 90s, right? We always talked about the issues with regards to global warming and a transition to away from fossil fuels. I've played Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri. I know what happened when you engage in global warming, right? Like, we all knew what was happening. We could have divested from fossil fuels and away from the global supply chains that theoretically could have become an issue when things like the war in Ukraine happened, right? These are all things that could have been mitigated by the transformation to a greener economy that we've known for decades that we could have done. We've not done it. We relied on foreign supply chains, we relied on imports, and now we have a supply chain issue due to foreign wars and due to the pandemic. And now our asses are being completely shown up for the lack of preparation that's been done, again, both by the current Conservative governments and also under New Labour, who had a huge mandate to make sweeping changes to change this country for the better, and they did fucking nothing. They did absolutely nothing, and they only have themselves to blame.
We have a situation where...
And again, we have governments in power who are failing to represent our needs and for short-term gain. Like, it's infuriating.
We need to be really understanding what's happening. And all the talk about 1970s sort of pay spirals and inflation is yesterday's problem. You know, it is 40 years ago. Right? We have a very, very different problem.
But this is what
nowadays.
you're clear.
And
This
we
is what
need
the
to have
government's
relevant measures.
You know, trying to sort out strikes such as the RMTs to their satisfaction will spark a 70s inflation spiral. You're saying that's not the case at all?
Well, let's talk about the food bank then. Because we're seeing more and more people coming to our food bank in Stratford-upon-Avon. It's not just food poverty, it's now fuel poverty. And it's the first time for years that we're now seeing less and less in the...
I guess kind of the UK was really the epicenter of a bunch of the your personal carbon footprint nonsense that got kind of shoved down our throats by a BP advertising campaign to shift the issue of climate change away from the structural changes that were needed towards some kind of personal, atomized neoliberal version of it, where apparently BP weren't to blame when we started needing to use fucking paper straws, or we needed to car share or whatever, when really what we actually needed was structural change that completely revamped the way the economy worked, when actually BP ended up being left off the hook for all of that.
Warehouse to give out because people can't afford when they go shopping anymore to drop a few tins into the food bank basin in the supermarkets. So what happens now when we haven't got the food to go and give to these individuals? It's drying up.
Rachel, we haven't heard very much.
Yeah,
You've got Nick here saying the government hasn't got a strategy. You've got Anne here saying that linking rising inflation to wage inflation is...
And to be fair, as I said previously, I'm glad Boris Johnson's solution to this is let's up the payments for people who are on state benefits. Let's do a council tax rebate. Let's engage in at least some level of additional government support to help people who do have to rely on food banks to get them through the cost of living crisis, right? It's not enough. Nowhere near enough. It's not an actual good solution long term, but it's better than nothing. Whereas if we had David Cameron and George Osborne still in power, they'd have just let them die. They'd just been like, tough shit, your problem, mate. Charity begins at home, big society. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps, and we just have a bunch of dead people on our hands. So again, Boris Johnson's desire for personal power rather than pursuing ideological dogma has helped us out in a very minor way with regards to getting at least some cost of living payments being put through from a state level.
Is false, and you've got Mick saying actually you're not valuing workers.
OK, well, where to start? I think the first thing to say is that we are living in very difficult times. We all know that. These are global pressures on our economy. As people have said, we have a war in Ukraine that is affecting...
Yeah, but you're absolutely right, SVXON, in that, we've not made the green transition, so we need to have policies put in place. We can't just Captain Hindsight about it like I did previously. We do need to put in place measures which are going to mitigate that until we do make that transition, right? And so, for example, reopening the coal mines. I wonder if there was a Labour leader who might have suggested that as a potential policy to be able to make ourselves more energy self-sufficient and generate, more less reliance on imports of fossil fuels. Oh God, I maybe a Labour leader might have proposed that. I don't know whether they did or not. That could have been a thing that we could do currently to be able to get an additional to relieve the pressures on the energy industry because of the supply chain crisis until we make the transition. That's something that we could theoretically do. Like, I'm not against additional oil drilling in the North Sea or additional coal mining on land until the green transition gets made, because we can't just not have people with power. We can't just let energy prices spiral out of control and just let the Ofgem completely sidestep any kind of actions taken to mitigate the issues with the rising cost of energy. Although the current kind of Martin Lewis mentioned this on a previous segment I did about how the way in which Ofgem have made it so that our private market is deliberately uncompetitive, in that if the futures market goes down based on the agreed contracts previously, if people switch providers or whatever, and they switch down to a lower price, the additional profit that gets made by that company has to be paid back to the original person who had the contract that they've changed from. Basically, meaning that there's no reason for any of the competitors to sell at lower prices, because all of the gain that's made for the consumer just gets paid back into the original supplier. I can't remember the exact details, but it's absolute nonsense what Ofgem are doing. Essentially, negating any ability for any of these private companies to be able to compete, which you would think would be the main reason to have a privatized market in the first place, is so that competition could theoretically drive prices down. But there's so much regulatory capture within Ofgem that they don't want to do that. They just continue putting the price cap up, even though gas prices are lower than the expected futures price the contracts were agreed on last year. The price has gone down, yet there's no reason for all of these companies not to just charge exactly at the price cap. It's completely mental, right? And even he admitted, he's agnostic on the idea of whether we should have a nationalised system, whether it should be privatised, because they both have some level of merit in his mind. But what we have now is the worth of both, the worst of both worlds, on what's going on.
The food supply. We've also come through the pandemic that has caused a supply shock, as Anne has said. So these are global factors that we are seeing all over the world. It is right that we have a responsible approach to this as a government, which we do. We do not want to go back to the 1970s. We don't have to go back to the 1970s, by the way, either. And that is why we have put in place our strategy to deal with the cost of living.
Please, I like disco music. Can we not go back? I like one cheap houses in disco.
I think people know that we have put a lot of support into people's pockets. The huge sums sometimes don't mean anything, but it is something like £37 billion, and it's targeted at those people on the low income.
But what about the point made by the woman in the red dress who's shaking her head at you there, saying, well, what about the people come to food banks?
Yes, and that's what I'm getting to, because those are the people that we want to help with the targeted support that we are giving those people.
The help comes from the British public, who graciously go into supermarkets and donate food into the baskets. Without the British public, we don't have that food to give out.
Yes, and I know that. And
so the government aren't helping us.
So I work with my local food bank, and I absolutely understand those pressures, and everybody is feeling the pinch. Of course they are, which is why the government has stepped in.
I love how half of the Tory MPs just performatively spend an hour a week at a food bank to say, well, I actually help mitigate the problems in society that I helped cause. So I think you'll find my hands are clean.
Money into people's pockets through the energy bill rebate, for example, through the household support grants that people can access, because people have very different situations. Not everybody is the same. People have different pressures. So we are working with those local...
No, I think I disagree, SVXON. I think a vast majority of it is just them living in a different world. They're all of their kind of private school education, divine right to rule, kind of coasting through life into what they believe is some kind of position that they are destined to be. As a representative for the great country or whatever. I think that's far more likely to me than them just wanting poor people to die. I don't think they're quite the GOP. I don't think they're quite that bad. But also a lot of them just see it as a career path. There's a really good Peter Oborne clip that I popped on TikTok from him on Newswipe, actually, talking about how the vast majority of MPs in Parliament today just use it as a stepping stone for big business. There was a huge thread talking about people who just went from that to being consultancy roles, to being put into private equity firms, into investment banks, to being given paid lobbying positions. People like Chuka Ramuna, all of these people who've just never really had the idea of going into politics to try and create a better world for either the general public at large or their voter base or whatever. They explicitly used it just to create that, just to advance their own personal career moving forward, to be able to use their position as leverage with the people who would donate money to their political campaigns, and then after doing so, going into getting into a lucrative career path post time in the Commons. So when you have a look at what's happening, especially under Keir Starmer, obviously Corbyn kind of broke the mould a bit, but especially under Keir Starmer, how Labour aren't really attacking the Tories on a lot of these key issues, really, with regards to the use of the public funds for kind of corruptive purposes. It's because that's what most members of Parliament are doing. It's like an area effect weapon. If you start pointing the finger, suddenly the finger gets pointed back at you, which is why the expenses scandal broke almost kind of like, it kind of the expenses scandal in the kind of mid 2000s or late 2000s even rather just kind of splurged over out of nowhere because once one finger got pointed at Jackie Smith, suddenly everything else started tumbling out over and over and over and over and over again because the bubble had been burst, right? And then suddenly we all had to talk about same thing with cash for honours as well. For ages, like cash for honours had been the thing, and I guess because a Labour government has started doing it because they started being run by people who had hands in the pockets of big business rather than solely a union-run movement. Suddenly there was they could have the finger pointed at them, and then cash for honours again, a big scandal. It's just like, well, that's just how things had been going forever. It just took the last straw on the camel's back to make the whole kind of house of cards collapse on top of the people who don't want to actually impact their own material circumstances. What is in the interest of an MP is not the same as what's in the interest of the population at large, and they know that. And it just the system needs overhauling in a pretty kind of large way, unfortunately. Oh, Nick Clegg works for Meta. He works for Facebook, right? Is he a lobby? Like, I don't know if an advisor or a lobbyist. I'm not sure, but he definitely works for Facebook.
Councils who are very close to their communities, who know what they need to get that funding out there to people. So I don't think I can address all the points because I know that other people want to come in. But I think the basic point I would make is that we do need to keep control of the economy and we need to keep control of inflation. But we absolutely value public sector workers. Don't let anybody tell you. Don't let anybody tell you.
The Tories have never, ever valued public sector workers. Public sector workers have been the enemy of the Tory party forever, at least in the last 40 years or so. Public sector employees have been the absolute enemy of the Conservatives. They are these people who get given huge amounts of money by places like the Heritage Foundation, who want all kind of public sector employees just thrust into the private sector. What absolute fucking gibberish. What a barefaced lie that she's saying about public sector workers. That's absolute nonsense. Anyone who knows anything about British politics knows that she's chatting absolute shit.
Inflation is out of control.
Can I just finish?
Yeah.
You've had quite a long time. Don't let anybody tell
Unfortunately, if it's a new Mini or an old Mini, because if it's a new Mini, unfortunately they're very German and not very British at all.
you that this
I
government
do love them though, they're cute.
does not value public sector workers. That is completely and utterly wrong. We have paid people's wages throughout this pandemic. We paid furlough. We've kept money in people's pockets through businesses.
You paid furlough to everybody. Come on, like pull the other one, please. It's
paid
nonsense.
businesses, grants to businesses.
Borrowing and spending.
Well, I mean, can you just let me finish? How else are we going to generate that? We've had a global pandemic, and by the
Did you get the Mini 1 or the Mini Cooper?
way, we were the fastest country to come out of lockdown because of this government's policies. We were the fastest government to roll out the vaccines, which has helped our economy to get back on track because of our Prime Minister's leadership.
I can't believe she's defending Boris Johnson. I mean, the vaccine kind of partnership between AstraZeneca and Oxford, that is the single good thing that was done. That and furlough were the two good things that were done by this government during the pandemic. It's a shame that they didn't lock down earlier, that they didn't come out of lockdown too quickly. That they didn't. It's a shame that they came out of lockdown too quickly. It's a shame that they did Eat Out to help out, and it's a shame that they then came out of lockdown too quickly again. Right? I'm sorry. Like, you can't just take the singular win that you did over the pandemic and then forget about all of the corruption, all of the contracts, the inability to go into lockdown too early, the herd immunity policy, Eat Out to help out. All of that stuff. You can't just brush away all of the government's failures because they got a couple of calls right. Like, I mean, to be fair, I've defended some level of what Boris has been doing, because I think I think materially he's done less bad than David Cameron has done. Right? That's my defense of Boris Johnson. But again, he's done it in a completely self-serving manner rather than done it because he thinks it's for the good of the country. But turns out that if you do things if you're doing things so that people will like you. That can sometimes by accident have a positive utility knock-on effect for everybody else.
We've got inflation currently sort of 9, 10, 11%. We got public sector, we got the universal credits and help for pensioners been sort of announced this week, where pensioners are getting 10%. You've got private sector paying.
Well, the pension triple lock has been a thing that's been going on for fucking years, right? You can't say, "Oh well done Tories for having the triple lock," when that's just a thing that already exists. There's not a change that they made. You can't congratulate on them for, well, actually the status quo has stayed the same for pensioners, so that's a really good thing. They didn't do anything. They've done nothing.
increases at, say, 4 or 5%. What's happening to the public sector? What's happened to the NHS? What's happened to the people that haven't actually had these pay rounds yet? Those are the people we have to worry about.
Okay. We could talk about this the whole programme, couldn't we? But actually, lots of you asked other questions, so I feel it is my duty to try and address some of those. Before I do,
That's where I'm going to stop the segment. I'm going to put on YouTube. So, quick end of segment ident here. If you enjoyed that segment, future YouTube viewers, please consider liking and subscribing. And if you click the bell, it'll notify you when I upload and when I go live. And you can watch more videos by clicking on my name down there, and also follow me on Twitch in the description. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.